PokeClass is sponsored by CollectorsCash.com, who now have your new set Next Destinies in stock at amazing prices. Get your boxes, sealed products and single cards like Mewtwo EX for the most competitive prices around, as well as all of your current format goodies within easy reach. If you're looking to stock up on anything Pokemon or any other card game for that matter, then head over to CollectorsCash.com after the show.
Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 64 of PokeClass. States and regionals have finally begun, but with the UK only having one taken place by now and the US still have around 2 weeks of action left at these hugely important events, I thought I'd throw together another deck analysis on a pretty unique deck born at the ECC. However, with the ECC almost becoming a distant memory already, it's still the only thing we have to base our new format on at the moment. With Next Destinies added to the mix, a lot of shifting decks has occurred, rendering decks only created through noble victories completely unviable in this new format. The formats are shifting fast and speeding up more and more, but the deck I'm covering is a lot more reactive in playstyle. It also took a spot in the top 8 of the ECC, and it didn't even run Mewtwo, so let's get to it. So we're calling this deck MessieMew, simply because it can't be called MewBox since it doesn't run Vileplume, and this is the name that has been circling the community due to its creator Mees from the Netherlands. What this version of the deck is designed to do is completely take advantage of all decks which are anticipated to do well at the tournament you're going to, since it's so versatile in its tech options. We've also got a lot of sniping in there, which takes down all of the low HP basic Pokemon flooding the new format, and paired that with direct techs to hit for double weakness on specific decks hitting the top tables. Mees took this deck to top 8 on the day of the ECC, and here is the list that he used. Many of you may see the list and be a little confused by some of the decisions in here. However, most of them will seem fairly obvious after seeing what was played on the day of the ECC. But this is the hardest part of the deck, choosing which text to put in before knowing what's going to come up on the day, a massive part of building this deck. But first, let's go over the cards in this list and see what you can change up for different matchups. First is for Mew, the perfect starter of the deck, since you want to be able to see off your attacker into the Lost Zone turn 1, if possible, to make sure that they will be there for the rest of the game for use whenever you like. What makes this deck even more versatile is that Mew can take full advantage of both Prism and Rainbow energy, making that whatever Pokemon you choose to send to the Lost Zone, you should have the required energy to attack with whichever attack you like. This versatility makes sure that Mew can take advantage of the weaknesses of whichever deck is sitting opposite. Next up is for free Yanmega, a card that has severely dropped in popularity since the beginning of rotation, but this is a surprisingly thick line for a deck at the moment. This is actually a very good call though, since we are seeing a lot of very low HP basics sitting on the bench waiting to be evolved, especially those 30 and 40 HP Tynamo. Linear attack deals 40 to anywhere on the field for free as long as hand sizes match, and this not only picks off those low HP pokes we're just talking about, it can also chip away at those beefy EXs that may be waiting to hit out later on in the game. Let's not forget about Sonic Boom, which can start dishing out lumps of 70 damage while you set up the rest of your counters on the bench, and can set you up for some quick KOs or some KOs later on in the game. This deck is all about planning. And that's it for the main bulk of the Pokemon in the deck. We have 2 main pokes which are there to set up the techs for the game and get damage onto the board after that initial turn, with both of them having free retreat to keep your side of the field as versatile as possible. Onto the techs Mees included in his ECC list, and I'll cover some more later on which you can possibly switch up yourself. The main tech here is Terrakion, a very popular Pokemon at the moment because of all the lighting types round at the moment. For just a fighting, Prism or Rainbow paired with another colourless energy, you can do 30 damage, 60 to any lightning type, or 90, 180 to a fighting weak opponent when you've just had a Pokemon knocked out the previous turn. Now I know many of you may already know this, but it is a tech that can spring out of nowhere, especially when you have Shaman from Unleashed in here to manipulate energy around the board in just a single turn. Just because a Terrakion isn't sitting on the bench, if you've seen the signs of a Terrakion, then it could be popping up and hitting for a fair bit of damage after you've taken a prize. Crobat Prime has not been seen in competitive play much at all, and wasn't always seen in MewBox variants either. However, with the huge HP of EXs making their debut in the format, Crobat's Severe Poison is the perfect attack to start chipping away at an EX's HP to either KO the next turn or take a cheap 2 prizes off of later in the game with all the snipe you have in this deck. Usually, retreating a heavily damaged Pokemon will mean that catcher is needed to bring it up for a prize or two, but this deck doesn't even need the catcher to take cheap prizes that the opponent cannot avoid. Of course, you don't have the lower stages of Crobat in here, so Mew is the one using both of Crobat's attacks. Also note that both of Crobat's attacks cost just 1 Psychic Energy, of which you run a fair amount of when paired with all your multi-type energy. Skill Dive can also be just as effective when you need to start chipping away at the opponent's HP, even more on damaged pokes on the bench. Chandelure is a Pokemon that had been prevalent in competitive play just one set ago, but when one Chandelure leaves, another one has entered, but this one is a Fire type. This is another of Mew's Lost Zone targets since it has just a single energy cost on the attack you want to be using, Flame Burst. What this attack does is 30 damage to the active Pokemon and then 30 damage to 2 more Pokemon on your opponent's bench. You can only imagine how devastating this could be to an opposing electric player when they have 2 30 HP Dynamo benched and 1 in the active spot, which has either been started with or dragged active with capture. Just a single Flame Burst will take 3 prizes in one go, leaving your opponent severely behind in the prize exchange and with a maximum of 1 Dynamo left in their deck. All this snipe certainly adds up when you're playing this, Yanmega and Crobat all in one deck. So the damage sounds low, but the choice you have where the damage goes is what makes this deck so unpredictable to play against. The last Lost Zone target is Jumpluff, pretty much your beat stick of the deck. When things like Crobat and Chandelure aren't going to help you out, then your see-off target can be this very Pokemon. Not only does it require the criteria of needing just 1 Grass Energy to use both of its attacks, but it has an attack that can max out at 120 for just 1 energy. That isn't too bad at all. Leaf Guard is also useful in various situations, but Mass Attack is the attack to go for, especially when you're facing a deck with heavy amounts of Mewtwo in. And this is the very point that makes the deck even better, is that it can tear up Mewtwo's with just 1 attack, thanks to Mew being a Psychic type and Mewtwo being double weak to Psychic. Just a Mass Attack with 9 Pokemon in play will give you a very nice 2 prizes, and even if they do get the return KO, you've taken 2 prizes and only given up 1. Even better when you can take double prizes off any future Mewtwo that hits the field very easily. And the last Pokemon in the list has already been mentioned and is seeming to be popular inclusion in many lists at the moment, just to keep your options as open as possible. Shaman from Unleashed moves energy around upon coming into play, as I'm sure you're all aware of by now. Celebration Wind allows you to attack with Pokemon in 1 turn that may usually take 2 or even 3 turns to set up normally, and can also fix misplayed energy in the long run. This is one versatile Pokemon that keeps the deck as reactive as possible to the current situation. Onto the trainer and supporter lines and you have yourself a fairly standard blend of the usual suspects. Pokemon Collector and Professor Juniper seem to be hitting around 4 copies in almost every single deck in the format right now. The format is hitting hard and fast at the moment, and with the ability to draw 7 new cards in just a single turn, it's too good to pass up, even for those setup decks that don't like to discard much resources at all. The original Professor, Mr. Oak himself, also makes an appearance as it's the safest and most reliable source of draw we have at the moment. And tying up the back end of the supporter line is Copycat and N, both from what I assume to help match hand sizes and make comebacks where Yanmega is concerned. I'm kind of surprised that we didn't see any Judge make it into the list, since Yanmega can take full advantage of it and it can wreck decks with just a single disruption. If you like the disruption of Judge or like to utilise Yanmega that little bit more, then go ahead and try some out if you can find the room. As for trainers, we have 3 Junkarm and 3 Catcher to drag up what you like and reuse whichever trainers you like. I actually like having 4 Junkarm in any deck right now, just because it's so versatile and you could probably cut down on your Catcher count by 1 if you feel that the snipe is doing enough work for you without having to pick prizes yourself. 3 Switch seems very excessive, but when you have double Terrakion in here, there's nothing you want less than a Terrakion stuck in the active spot with nothing to do for any time longer than a turn. After it's retaliated after you're fallen active, you should have the option in hand to get it out of the active spot as soon as possible, and that is why the count is so high. 2 Communication, a Lever Ball and Super Rod are your main ways of searching out the Pokemon you need and getting them back into the deck when they start falling during the game. And Pokegear is there to keep consistency as optimum as possible, which every deck should be doing if they want to go far. And finally we have 2 Lost Remover, a card that always seems to be a player's 61st card because it's incredibly good in a format filled with so much special energy, but it's always cut for more consistency cards such as Poker Gear. This card can win games by tipping the tide of energy attachments when it comes to big energy hoarding EXs, and can pull back games that look like they're getting out of hand. With 2 of them and 3 junk arm in your deck, you will have enough to render a lot of special energy completely useless for the rest of the game. To finish up with energy, as mentioned before, you have 4 of each multi-type energy, since all of your attackers that need energy are basic, and it also makes sure that you have the type of energy needed to perform the move you want at the time. 4 basic energy of 2 fighting and 2 psychic are still included to make sure that you still have some way of attacking if your opponent does have a ton of Lost Remover at hand. As for more options you can have in a deck like this, Pokemon wise, I think Jirachi could be pretty interesting, since you'll be able to get just 1 Flame Burst on multiple electric and then devolve them the next turn for multiple prizes, which makes sure you can still KO them even if they evolve. I don't think you should have to change the energy up too much either, since you already run basic Psychic and you'll never need too many heads on Stardust Song to get those devolutions that you need. Other Lost Zone targets such as Muck from Undaunted could also be considered, since you can drag up unsuspecting EXs and stick them in the active spot with damage racking up, and if Vileplume is ever popular in your area, it can cause havoc on that too. To be honest, the possibilities are pretty endless. If you find yourself an attacker that can attack for a single energy, then Mew can take full advantage of it, but just remember that Mew and the rest of these Pokemon are very fragile in a format filled with bulky basic EXs. However, Mew does still have a place in the format, but just needs to be used in the right way to tangle with the big contenders in the format. And that is pretty much the lowdown on the deck known as MessieMew. I didn't give out a skeleton list today, but that's because it would be very thin on the ground, and I wanted to show you Mees' list, just to show how a deck can be altered in a way to take on a whole metagame. Thanks for watching this week's episode of PokeClass. Please make sure you subscribe and take a second to leave a like in the bottom left hand corner, and I'll see you all next week.
Till I get home, so I can find a